What's that you say? I promised you an episode on blending a while ago? Okay, yeah, I guess it's been a little while. It's been over a year, Steve. Hello, all you minders out there. Thanks for tuning into the Mind of Watercolor. I'm sorry. I know I promised to do an episode on the white blend or blending with watercolor a long time ago. No excuses, okay? No excuses. And I'm glad so many of you responded to the idea of being called minders. My apologies to you UKers out there. I know it means a thug, kind of a bodyguard, but hey, community rules, right? I do want to build a community. I've always wanted to build a community since I started with this channel. I love the fact that many of you guys consider yourselves fans and are avid regular viewers. But what I had in mind more was that you understand that watercolor has a mind, sort of, and a personality. And you need to think about that mind and that personality whenever you paint. Because you need to cooperate with watercolor to produce great results. That's what a minder is. And that's what'll make you a better watercolor painter. So everybody give it up for my studio partner, Reese. Well, what do you think? It's about time I did this episode, right? I know, I need to quit promising things I can't deliver on. He's my fiercest critic. All right, let's get into it, minders, and learn this very important technique. All right, so let's get into the mind of watercolor here a little bit and just discover some characteristics about watercolor. The most basic kind of a wash is a flat wash, and this is the easiest and simplest kind of wash to do, and it's what watercolor probably excels at. Just a nice flat wash. What's happening here is the water is seeping or soaking into the paper and creating a bed of moisture that the color spreads out over. Watercolor, if I'm thinking in terms of its mind, is very happy doing this, and this is what it tends to do most of the time. In watercolor's mind, it prefers to stay within those wet boundaries. It will not venture beyond. Blotting my brush, picking up some of the excess. Watercolor will not venture beyond these dry boundaries. And it's real happy to stay in this nice little zone of moisture that you've created for it. As a result, watercolor creates very hard edges. Now in the second one I created, let me just dab in some red. This is gonna probably neutralize some of the green. Now look how it spreads throughout there, but no matter how close I get to the edge, it doesn't go beyond that edge, okay? Now the question of this video, how do you blend that out to a soft edge? Okay, how do we do it? But how do we do it in a way that watercolor loves, that watercolor happily cooperates with you and gives you the results you're looking for? I do a white blend. Now, what you have to do is you have to create moisture that it will spread out into, but spread out in a blended fashion. So, all right, I'm just going to paint an amorphous shape, all right? Now, I want to blend this, and you have to do this fairly quickly because it will soak into the paper and create that edge almost within minutes. So here's what I'm doing. I'm painting that, I'm wiping the pigment out of my brush. My brush is nearly dry, and I'm coming along this edge, and I'm pulling it out. Now, a white blend, you can do just like I did, but usually with darker pigment, you've got to rinse your brush so that you have clean water. Now, what I'm doing is I'm coaxing it out. I'm expanding the shape, but I'm coaxing it out with clean water. Now, it's wet. The shape is wet enough that it pulls out into here, but there's not so much wetness and so much pigment that it all flows into this area. If I had a lot of pigment, it would all just fill in right in here. See? That's where my edge is, although you can't see it once I blended it out. Now don't worry, I'm going to do several of these because I want you to get this. And this blend, and it depends on how you paint. If you paint loosely, expressively, with a lot of wet and wet washes, you may not use this as much, but it's still helpful. No matter how you paint, it's still helpful in channeling where that watercolor goes. And here's the process again. We're going to do several of these, so just don't worry. Paint a shape. All right. Now, if that was a very light pale paint, I would probably just blot my brush like this and blend out the edge. But with a darker paint, it doesn't tend to work. So I clean my brush quickly, blot it quickly, and lift. And you can back brush, just don't do it too much of it. You can back brush till you get this blend, okay? And if it's too dark down here, you want it to blend to white, keep dipping, cleaning your brush. Get it as dry as you possibly can and lift. Now the temptation is to add water down here. But if you do that, you're going to create a bloom. You want it dry down here so the gradation goes, but the paint is discouraged from flowing. And you can go back and paint within this shape and blend it out a little bit, or even it out, I should say. Now typically when I'm painting, I do this all very quickly. I mean, I'm just meticulously going through it. And as long as this, by the way, as long as this edge is damp, hasn't dried yet, you see how I'm blending it out to white. Practice this over and over and over and over and over. It's just this kind of paint control is so important in watercolor. Whether you're doing a big wash and a big wash, see, this scales up. You can scale this up to a big wash, a really, really large wash, by using a brush like this. Same technique works. All right? Now, if you're painting within a defined shape, make sure you give yourself plenty of room to blend out, because you can, once it's dry, you can layer and go over this again. Okay? Blot my brush, almost dry. That's not enough. I need to add some water. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll come out here and I'll, with the clear water, that's almost clear, I didn't get my brush clean enough, and back brush towards that edge, okay? Again, you got to do it quickly. You don't want to give this paint up here time to dry or to get too flat. Your glossiness is your clue. You have to go back in the shape and wet it evenly again. Now, I have so much moisture that pigment's pushing down and I'm losing my gradation. So what am I going to do? Clean my brush, blot it so that it's dry, almost dry, and pick it up. If your brush is drier than the surface of the paper, it acts like a vacuum. Basically sucks it right up. A little bit of clear water and just brushing out that edge. Nice blend. Let's do it again. This is fairly a dry wash. So these washes do not have to be super wet. Because it's darker paint, I'm rinsing the pigment out of my brush, drying it off, Still have it in my brush. Placing clear water down here. This is like a Prussian blue, so it's high staining, very intense. So even the slightest bit in my water or paint brush is showing. Now it's a little wetter down here, so it's starting to push pigment back, so I'm just going to even it out a bit. Alright, so how would you blend one color into another? What I have here is a flat wash and a graduated wash and a couple pale ones. What you do is you put any of those down and you let them thoroughly dry. Then you come back and you just do your graduated wash over to blend. It's sort of a glaze. So if I wanted to blend a purple with this, I would do it like this. Same technique, but now I'm just painting over a dry shape. Now I have a nice purple to red blend. I can even go back up here while it's still wet if I want, dab in some darker pigment. Or I can wait till all that dries and do another glaze over that. So maybe I want to come over here with a purple and have it graduate into that. So let's try that. I'm doing all this just so you can see how I manage my moisture and water and wiping. What I've done is, again, this edge of the graduated wash or the blend is lighter than this end where all the pigment is. So I've managed it to keep it drier down here. And I've managed it by rinsing out my brush and having almost no pigment down here. Now you might ask, why couldn't I do that as a wet in wet? Well, you could. But the difference would be you don't have the control. So if you're wanting to get all this nice light area here, you know, and it getting darker out here and getting darker out here, you can do some of that in a wet and wet wash, but you have a little more control this way. Wet and wet washes tend to take off on their own, but it is possible. So that's just a different way of doing it. Well, that's it, everybody. I mean, it's really no more complicated than that. I know I'm probably over talking this, but I get so many questions from beginners, and it's just obvious they have not got control of the medium. They've not got control of the water and the paint and the pigment. And this is what you have to do. This is what you have to do before you can really do much of anything in watercolor. And it's really not hard. Once you've done it enough, it'll just click. Thanks, everyone. Hope this was a help. If it was, give me a thumbs up. If you want to see more of this content, I hope you'll subscribe. We'll see you next time.